Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Lost City of Ithos, Mage, Errant, Book 4, Chapters 20 through 23, Storm Armada, A Ship Lives Up to Its Name, Conspirators, and Delta. In these chapters, we finally get the conversation between Talia and Hugh, and also we find out that the Rising Cormorant is kind of a submarine. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. I don't think Dan is here in the chat. He showed up a little bit late last time, so he may be on his way, but thank you, Dan, very much. And we've got Eduardo and Ms. T here in the chat to keep me company, so delightful. I really enjoyed these chapters a lot. There's so much going on in them. I did read this section twice. And I just wanted to mention, and this is something that I am open to opinions on. I'm soliciting opinions, actually. What do you guys think of named chapters? Like, I feel like I have a real back and forth with them. For example, the title Storm Armada for a chapter. Totally fine. We're good with it. The title, A Ship Lives Up to His Name. I don't like it. Too much. We don't need to do all that. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like there are times, and this I have noticed, forgive me guys, if you're watching me on camera, I'm like rubbing at my eye, but I feel like I got lemon juice in my eye or something. It's like burning. But there were some chapters in certain books that I have covered where, if anything, the title of a chapter low-key gave away what was going to happen in the chapter, which I thought was a really bad move. I feel like if you're, not worried about that, then I guess, but you should want to keep some suspense there. And Miss T says an entire grammatical sentence is a bit much. My favorite one, and I don't remember exactly how it goes, but there is a chapter in, I think, New Moon, one of the Twilight books. And the title of the chapter is, I guess, you need my brain? Fine, take my brain. My heart? Fine, take my heart. Take everything. Take everything I have. And that's the title of the chapter. Needless to say, number one best chapter title of all time. Anyway, I'm not trying to accuse Mr. Bierce of that kind of aggression, but I just, So, all right, chapter 20. We start off with Alustin basically confirming what it seems most people have figured out, which is they are being targeted by somebody who is attempting to keep them from continuing their quest. This scene is really interesting because our friends are talking openly about trying to find the city of Ithos in front of all of the Radhan who don't know that's what they're doing. But because of this weird enchantment, they can talk about it in front of them, and the Radhan just won't understand or know what it is they're saying. And this is such an odd enchantment that I keep sort of forgetting how it works. So at one point, I think Hugh is just like, well, why would the city of Ithos be there? And I'm like, Hugh, psst, psst, what are you doing? You're blowing our cover. And then I was like, oh, wait. They aren't going to know. However, by the end of this little conference, it seems like the enchantment is wearing away at record speed. And I'm wondering if that's just because of the degradation of the spell in general, or if it is due to how many mentions there have been, or the proximity that they may have to Ithos. I don't know. But for all I know, all of those things could be a factor, potentially. So he is explaining that there is a second storm coming. And it's really cool because what Alestin has done here is put out a bunch of pieces of paper that are in different colors, I think even, and made a 3D model of the ocean and the Cormorant and surrounding areas. And I am a massive fan of being able to like look at a model of anything when we're planning with a big group of people. But, you know, my mind immediately always goes to scenes in like Star Wars where it's a projection that's kind of semi-transparent and honestly kind of boring looking. And the idea of seeing this same type of scene being done with what amounts to sort of origami art, that sounds really cool. I want to see it. I'm just saying. So he says, the second storm is, like we expected, going to miss us by leagues. Unfortunately, I scried at least a half dozen more already on their way, and even more forming in the edges of the Skyreach range. I think we can all agree they're unnatural, but there's nothing we can do to stop them. This is clearly the work of one or more of the great powers. Christ, sometimes getting through a sentence is like just more energy than it's worth. And he says, we're ahead of schedule because that other storm gave us a bit of a boost, but getting to the second or third potential locations is going to be a problem. Again, he says Ithos here, and the Rad Hand get confused looks for a second. Captain Greffa shook her head. This would all be so much easier if you could tell us what you're looking for, she said. You would think that this would have reminded me. Ladies and gentlemen, it did not. And then he starts to describe the harbor and the fact that there is a gravity enchantment. So it's like meant to keep the water somewhat stable and in a bowl shape, as he puts it. But during a storm, it can't withstand. You know, it's just not a match for that. It's meant for doing this during calm times. And if they were to go into the harbor and then the storm came, they would wind up trapped. And probably there would be somebody either already waiting for them or there would be somebody about to swoop in quickly afterward. So the third site is an open patch of ocean to the southeast of Themyscira. Wait, why would Imperial Ithos be out in the ocean? Hugh asked. Several of the nearby Radhand shook their heads, confused. It probably wasn't, Alestin said. Odds are, it's none of the sites we'll be checking. This one is an especially low probability. Successful floating cities are exceptionally rare, and they seldom survive more than a couple of generations. The tides and storms are simply too much for them, no matter how well built or designed. It's also dead center in the path of at least 4 or 5 storms. And then he says, Site 4, Zophor, one of the highest priority sites being investigated. And Sabe says, isn't that like a swamp and a high density ether region, which I thought wasn't what we were looking for? And he says, yes. And it also has a junction mana well with a complex labyrinth. The actual site in question is Lake Nelu, about a week's travel upriver from Zophor. It's a huge, shallow lake that the Ilosa River passes through on its way to the delta and Zophor. The paper scraps swarmed and twisted, and the sea was replaced by a map of the shore, showing a great river delta with a sort of crude grid of channels formed by the tide overwhelming the river's current twice a day. The islands were completely covered in a shockingly detailed rainforest. As Hugh traced the paper river upward, it slowly grew more and more dominated by the river current until it was a vast interlocking braid of rivers filled with great islands. Hugh seldom saw anything like a distinct bank to the river on a paper map. Instead, the waters seemed to intrude into the forest, and the trees of the forest into the river. In fact, many, if not all, the islands in the channel, on second glance, were more groves of trees protruding from the paper waters than anything. And I really like this description because it's the sort of thing that I don't feel I really understood until I went to a region that was this kind of jungle. But I hiked through a really densely jungled area in the mountains of Guatemala. And there's no banks, there's no sand, everything, it's like mud. And it's like transitioned directly from water to ground. And I put ground in quotes because like, it's not even quite ground. A lot of the time it feels more like it's dirt trapped amongst tree roots. And we're calling it ground because like, that's the best word for it. But very much, if the trees weren't there, this ground would not be here either. They're holding it all together. And it's a really weird sensation in comparison to things that I am used to, where, you know, a beach has a 40-foot like divide between where the seagrass ends and the water begins, or sometimes way, way bigger than that, which is why they can build boardwalks and things. And rivers, I mean, even the ones that don't have like necessarily ordinary banks, there is still a sort of sloping sensation where you know you're getting to the river, whereas in a jungle, the river will simply be there out of nowhere. It feels like there's no real warning. And depending on the season and stuff, that river will swell a lot. And so if you go down in one direction one day and then it begins to rain and you have to head back the way you came, you're not necessarily going to be able to follow the same course at all, because the water will completely cover the pathway that you had used yesterday. And it's just a really different experience. And it's something that's like, there's something very intimidating about it to somebody who is used to land being land all the time. And the land is something that I'm used to like traversing and navigating. And there's a sense of it just super duper not being my turf. And I mean me specifically, not like human beings' turf, but like my turf, because I know how poorly I am able to sort of navigate that area, and that there are a lot of animals that this is their jam. And so I had better watch my step, because if it were to come down to like getting chased or something trying to bite me, I'm going to be at the disadvantage for reals. So I am really interested to see how some of like, you know, they go underwater for a lot of this, but I imagine to some degree they're going to have to travel through part of this area. And I wonder what that's going to look like. So this is when Hugh is like, where's Zophor? I don't see a city on here. And Captain Greffa is like, it's there. You'll understand when we get there. And everybody else seems to be kind of like amused except Talia. And then she gets a look on her face and she says, wait, is it like Hold Yehal? And Alestin says, yes, even more impressive in some ways. So now we are officially at Hugh being the only one who doesn't know. And I really want somebody to let Hugh in on this before we, like, I completely appreciate wanting to see Hugh's face when he sees something this unusual for the first time. But Hugh is just so sensitive that I feel like leaving him out as the sole person who doesn't know whatever this little in-joke is bound to make him feel self-conscious. And I'm glad it doesn't seem to, like, that's not in the text. But if I were one of his friends in that scene, I think I might have, like, spilled the beans to him just because I couldn't take him looking forlorn. So I am kind of going to guess here that Zophor is, like, built into the trees. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's built down into the water somehow. But based on what Alustin said about like island cities not really working out, I'm going to say that doesn't seem like it would be an easy thing to pull off. And the trees makes a lot of sense if you're trying to account for the changing size of a river and the changing highs and lows of water. It's going to be a lot easier to build in trees or on stilts, things like that, and really camouflage as well so that, you know, you can keep yourself to yourself if you feel like it. That said, it does seem like most folks know where it is, so I don't know how much camouflage matters to them at this point, but okay, so the storms, he has those rise up on the map. And he says we could try and avoid them, but that would add days, if not a full week, onto our trip. Given how quickly the Exile Splinter's hold on Imperial Ithos is fading, we don't know how long it will be until the city merges back into our world. The Radhan all looked confused to the point of pain, and several of them were clutching their heads now. Uh-oh. I don't love this. Like, and if they all figure it out, what's worrying me is that the Tongue Eater, they like managed to keep their language from being destroyed by it. But if Ithos is the one responsible, and the Radhan are the ones on this mission, and something happens that causes them to be in the crosshairs and to lose their language, I'm going to be real upset. Right? I'm just going to say that right out the gate. That's going to bum me out, and I'm going to be mad at Alustin probably. Hugh notices, by the way, in the midst of all of this, that Sabe is glaring at Alustin. And he is just sort of keeping it to himself, but he's just like, man, what is going on with these two? And later on, Archer comes and talks to her and is just like, so you just don't trust him anymore. And she kind of adds a caveat to that. She's like, look, I trust him that he's not going to like neglect us. And I believe in him as a teacher and everything. But as far as trusting that he will do what's best for us, not necessarily. The way that we were just kind of pawns in this coup, it doesn't seem like we matter that much. It's just us being used in whatever plans are set up. And it's an interesting conversation because Archer breaks it down to, I mean, yeah, he's loyal to Kandaron, but in the end, he wants revenge more than he wants anything. So he has disobeyed her a couple of times in order to carry out what he feels against them. And I was like, that's kind of fun, actually. I don't approve of it, but I like there being an authority figure who is not, quote, wise. You know what I'm saying? That's not to say that Alustin isn't wise in certain ways, but he isn't like, you know, some pacifist talking about how violence is just a cycle and you have to learn to overcome your feelings. Here's a man that's giving into his feelings. And that's interesting to watch when it's somebody who is supposed to be kind of like the level-headed one that keeps everybody else in line. What happens when there's nobody to keep him in line, you know? And then Alustin says about the sea serpents, we can normally handle those, but crossing storms and dealing with serpents would be a nightmare. And Archer says, what do you think what do you want to bet the storms are behind the serpents stirring? And then the third problem, Havathi privateers. They might not have a navy worth a pair of old socks, but they've got the money to hire as many independent ships as they could ever want. I've found at least a dozen so far, all with a complement of sacred swordsmen and assorted battle mages on board. And there might be more caught in the storms as well. They even have a war ammonite in the area. I don't know what that means. Is this something that has been explained to us already? If not, don't worry, I'll just wait and figure it out. But I just want to make sure that I didn't miss something here. Or if this is a term that maybe I should just know, you know. So Alestin then says, there's a reason I picked this ship after all. Same reason it's called the Rising Cormorant. It should be easy to let us safely check sites 3 and 4. And Dan says, Dan's in and out of work. He says, I think they mean the sea animal, a war ammonite. Oh, an ammonite is... okay, I'm seeing what you're saying. So basically, they have their ships and they also have like a sea creature that's trained somehow. That's not awesome. Don't love that. So he says this thing about the ship and what it can do. The whole crew sort of freezes up, and then the captain is like, ugh, I should have fucking known that you were aware of that. God damn it. So apparently this is meant to be kind of a secret, and he's just fucking their whole shit up, which seems pretty much like his jam. He is very smug. So we get, all of our friends are given different exercises that they have to work on as usual while we're doing this thing. Except Hugh is the one that is going to be funneling mana into this spell to get the Cormorant to do what it does. And Hugh is... The way that this works out, he is in the middle of that job when Talia comes to talk to him. I'll double back for this, but I did find it funny that like she chose this moment. I'm just, it wound up being fine, but I would have had too much anxiety to talk to him while he's in the middle of this. And then we have this thing between Hugh and Godric, and they're learning to train with ice. And this is really, I liked this because of the necessity of it. So what we're going into, this like water heavy, tree heavy area, it's not going to have a lot in the way of stone, the way that our friends need it to use their powers to their best. They're going to be at a disadvantage, and freezing water into ice is the only way that Godric's going to have a weapon or Hugh is going to have a weapon. And the sword that had been made of ice is a ring, and Hugh says it was always a ring. The swordsman had just persuaded it to form a sword-shaped shell around itself, which I really like this idea. And there's this moment here where Arthur says, I doubt anyone but a warlock could have talked to this lass with any ease. And he hands the ring over to Godric, who asks Hugh, is the ring really female? And Hugh says it barely even has self-awareness or a personality. I think your dad just likes assigning personalities to things. To which Godric says, you're not wrong there. I can't even tell you how many times I've caught him being disappointed at a cooking pot like it burnt the food to spite him. And I'm kind of thinking, well, Hugh, you did manage to talk it into doing a certain thing. And granted, it may not have like a distinct personality, but it may be that Arthur is better at sussing that kind of thing out than you are, or is more sensitive to it than you are, and can go a little deeper than you think is even there. You know what I'm saying? I just sort of, the fact that Arthur does this could just be a bit of a quirk of his, which I would totally accept, because, all of us have our little things that we do. But it could also be that this is genuinely kind of part of where his strength comes from, is being able to connect with and communicate with items that you wouldn't think would be capable of doing that. I just like that concept as well because of, the Young Wizard series. There's a lot of talking to objects and convincing them to either do the thing that they are supposed to do, that they want to do. For example, you convince a lock that is locked. Don't you want to unlock so that you can relock? I know how much you love locking. And now you're just locked, and that's kind of boring. And if you unlock, for me, you can relock again, and that's super fun. That's like your favorite, right? And I think that's a real neat idea to sort of speak to the deepest desire of an object that was created for a particular purpose and has this, like, you know, goal that it's always focused on. So I would be open to that with Arthur, I'm just saying. So they toss it into this barrel of water, and he pulls out a huge hammer made out of ice. Named her Hail Strike, Arthur said, and you and Hugh are going to be spending a lot of time training with ice over the next few days. There isn't any naturally occurring stone, which is a big disadvantage for both of you. And ice isn't near as easy to use as normal stone is. And then Hugh is like, aren't you at the same disadvantage? And Arthur says, don't worry about me, Hugh. I'm never at a disadvantage. This man has such big dick energy. I swear to God. Arthur is a generous lover. You just know he is. This is a man who would make you come first. He just fucking would. More than once, I bet. You know, it would be a matter of pride for him. So then we go to chapter 21. A ship lives up to its name. And we have Hugh doing the thing where he is connecting with the feather at the prow of the ship. And he begins funneling mana into it. It takes him a while to, like, get himself hyped up enough to do it. And let's see. He could feel multiple enchantments connecting into the reservoirs below decks, at least 4 of them. But only 2 started drawing on the mana. There was something of a delay as the artificial reservoirs began to convert the unattuned ether from the storm into what Hugh suspected was water mana, as well as 2 other types of mana he couldn't identify. We're sinking. Are we supposed to be sinking right now? Why, yes. Yes, we are. So the ship begins to sink into the water as the captain explains cormorants dive deep. They swim farther down than any other seabird while fishing, sometimes multiple ship lengths beneath the water. They're not the most graceful flyers. Their wings are short, and they have to work harder than any other seabird to take to the air to stay there. Beneath the water, though, Griffa trailed off as the sea rose to the deck. Hugh winced, sure it was about to wash through the gaps in the railing, but it didn't. The water just kept rising along the sides of the railing, then atop it, as though there was an invisible wall keeping the water out. Beneath the water, Greffa continued, they're among the most graceful of hunters. They'll pursue schools of fish, explore nooks and crannies in submerged rocks, and easily evade sharks and other marine hunters. The walls subtly ballooned outward as they rose, so only the tips of the yardarms touched the water. They dug into the walls and trailed wakes behind them. Hugh realized they were still moving forward as they sank. And when the cormorants rise from the depths, Captain Greffa said, they're like arrows launched toward the sky. The walls of water closed atop them, and the rising cormorant sank completely below the surface of the sea. So then we go into Talia's POV. And this whole thing of being down here and being able to see into the ocean, it is just really wild. And she is enjoying it so much. There's like all of this light that's filtering through, dappling along things. There are fish that are, you know, at eye level swimming next to them. Several of the rat-hand children were making a game of reaching through the invisible barrier and trying to snatch the smaller fish with their hands. Talia could see a school of dog-sized fish being pursued by some sort of brilliant red squid 3 times the length of a man. The light dimmed a bit as the ship sank farther, but the ship's dive stabilized a few ship lengths in depth. Oh, man, what tongue twisters. So she's like playing, digging her fingers into the water and is like giggling and enjoying herself. And Sabe is like, wow, I haven't seen you happy in a minute. And they have a nice little convo. Godric comes by as well. And they both say, look, it's time for you to go talk to Hugh again. And I was sort of surprised by this. This is the thing. It's not so much that they're telling her to stop avoiding Hugh, because I fully agree with that. That's silly. However, what Godric says is that he went and talked to Hugh, and Hugh told him he wouldn't tell Godric what he decided because it wouldn't be fair to Talia. And I was sort of like, if somebody says, I'll give you some space so that you can think about it, and you come, excuse me, I'm just trying to adjust my chair here, and you wind up coming to a decision, I would think it's your responsibility as the person who asked for the time to then initiate the second half of the conversation. And this isn't like a big deal, but I'm just curious what you guys think, because I was surprised at the fact that Hugh had apparently reached a decision and hadn't come to Talia to talk about it yet. And I guess maybe it's that she has been avoiding him so studiously that he's kind of like, I'm just going to wait until she chills out a little bit. I don't know. But it was just really shocking to me that he apparently had already decided and was just chilling, waiting for her without having sent a signal to talk or anything like that, you know? But anyway, there's a conversation between Sabe and Godric, and she's thinking Hugh's going to tell Talia no. But Godric is like, the thing is, when Hugh found out Talia had feelings for him, he said he hadn't let himself look at her that way. And he never said, like, look at any of you that way. He just didn't let himself think of her that way. Which, if he is keeping himself from thinking of something, it means that he was starting to think about it at all. And also, he doesn't think anybody could possibly love him. He doesn't believe he deserves it. And he doesn't trust compliments. He thinks when people give him compliments that, like, they're deep down kind of mocking him or getting ready to, like, fuck with him somehow. They really convinced him, his shit family, that he's worthless. And I think he only was able to, like, hook up with Ava because you and Talia kept emphasizing it's casual, it doesn't mean anything, it doesn't have to be anything big. And that took enough of the pressure off that he was like, okay. But when it's something that's significant, I think he just doesn't really, like, believe that's for him. And I had this kind of paranoia myself, and I think a lot of people who grew, it's really funny because, like, I got to high school and then blossomed into almost one of the, quote, popular girls. So things, like, turned a corner very abruptly. But when I was in middle school, not only did I look like a troll doll, but I didn't understand a lot of social cues and stuff. And a part of me thinks that I may be on the spectrum a little, or perhaps it was simply that being an only child, I hadn't gotten to socialize enough. But I found myself constantly being the butt of little jokes that I didn't get were jokes until it was too late and it had happened to me already. Or, like, little moments that were not, like, there was a guy in my class who was one of the popular ones sitting next to his friend, and he wanted to borrow a pen. And, like a true nerd, not only did I have extra pens, but they all came in, like, different scented inks. And I, like, told him what each of the smells was and was like, which one do you want? Just having a little convo, lending a pen. And one of his friends was like, you know he's not going to go out with you, right? Which had never even entered my head, not only because I wasn't dating, but I also did not think this boy was attractive. Popular or not, he wasn't cute. And I was so, like, puzzled that I didn't even get offended in the moment. I was just like, so what do you even, and then, you know, you have time to think about it and then you get embarrassed like after the fact. So this definitely resulted in thinking when people paid me compliments as I blossomed and became cute, I didn't believe that I was cute for a really long time because I had been teased a lot for various things about my appearance that suddenly became positives. My hair being curvy, and I wouldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. I thought it was always somebody laughing behind my back, laughing up their sleeve, I think is the way that people say it. So when I found out like certain guys liked me, I didn't even believe that was true either. I thought that it was either they felt sorry for me, genuinely thought that was it, that they felt sorry for me, or that they didn't like me at all. And they were just like saying that to make somebody else jealous or annoyed. And I just really felt for this, like description of Hugh, and Sabe truly doesn't understand it. I appreciate that Godric gets it. And Sabe is like, man, I really want to beat the shit out of his family. He says, do you ever wonder what he would be like if his parents were still alive? And she's like, oh, all the time. The only thing is, him having magic in Emblem, I don't know if they would have sent him to the school. So we may never have even gotten to meet him. So that's the only reason I can say I wish that, you know, I wouldn't wish things had gone a different way. But anyway, so we have a moment here where Sabe goes and talks to Del. And you guys heard me say last time how I really felt like her and Del were connecting. I was hoping that she was just going to like ignore the twins, or not twins. Del's a twin with the girl, but him and Yara, I think, right? But either way, I was hoping she was going to go and like kind of initiate something with him. And it turns out she's just trying to help him get over his trauma. And he says like, he's not looking for anything right now. And I was like, oh, well, bummer, but okay. And she asks him if he wants to go for a swim, and he gets really frozen up. But she manages to gently be like, look, we'll be okay. I will be there. And if I can help you, maybe I can get through my shit too. And he takes her hand. We don't see them like do the thing, but we know he's taking the first step, which is exciting. So then we go to the conversation between Hugh and Talia. And there's a lot of talking about all kinds of, you know, what are Leviathans and yada, yada, yada. I won't get into all that. That's not to say it wouldn't be important later. Potentially it is. Oh, well, we'll get there if we need to. But eventually, he says, you really have feelings for me? This isn't some weird joke. And when he takes a long pause after she's like, of course it's not, she then says, you're trying to think of a way to break it to me kindly. People don't need time to think about these sorts of things if they're really interested. Which again, she's sort of seeing things the way Sabe does. She's not understanding the psychology of things for Hugh. So he goes and like pulls her headscarf off. It had gone from less than a finger width in length to more than twice that. It was already thick enough that Hugh could only see her scalp tattoos at specific angles through it. You know, you look pretty tough like this. I kind of like it. What? I don't. Hugh leaned in and kissed her. After a moment, he leaned back. Talia just looked shocked and baffled. Why? She finally got out. Why what? Hugh asked, looking around. He'd vaguely expected a bunch of Radan to burst into applause or catcalls. I really like this. He's been trained by his relationship with Ava. Why did you just kiss me? Oh, that? I put poison on my lips to kill you. I appreciate, though, that he's thinking he can just be really smooth. And she's like, no, I need an answer. I really thought you were going to reject me. And he says, first he kisses her again. I told you I was going to think about it. If there hadn't been a chance, I'd say yes. I would have just told you that. Part of me was all for it the instant you said something. But I was worried, basically, that I was just going to use you as like a rebound, and I didn't want to do that. And I kept thinking, and finally I talked to Arthur, and he was basically like, if you say no to her, you'll hurt her that way. And if you date her and things don't work out, you hurt her that way. Either way, there's potential to be hurt, but you've also got to listen to what you want. And I liked that point of view a lot. So the two of them are a thing now. I'm not not happy about it. I just don't really feel that kind of chemistry between the two of them particularly. So that's kind of where I sit, is that I accept it and it's fine, but I don't sense any particular tension that makes me invested. So, this may just be because it's early days. It may be that it's the way that, John Bierce is writing something that's clearly meant to be sort of YA, and I am used to things that are more adult. And the way that would have to be written is not age appropriate to give the kind of... I don't think that's it, though, because having just finished recording an episode of coverage with Miles for one of the Sookie Stackhouse books that Definitely Dead, the first chapters, she runs into this guy that she had met once before, and there is nothing overtly sexual, and the chemistry is flying off the page. So I don't think that's it. I just think maybe it feels very young, and that's just not quite connecting for me. I don't know. So yeah, I'm happy for Talia that she's getting a chance here. I'm happy for Hugh that he's letting himself do something that's risky and scary, but I am not particularly invested in them as a couple, and I wasn't shipping them necessarily. So, chapter 22, and Alestin is looking around and looking at the notes and says, this is like a mana desert, but not exactly. It's not what we're looking for, and it's probably just a curiosity, but it's probably worth an expert investigating it. And mentions that there's so many curious squid, which is a really weird thing. I don't know if this is going to be important. I'm going to mention it, though. And then Sabe asks Hugh if his night vision can see into the depths of the water, into the dark. And he looks down and then looks back up, and he's like, oh God, I really wish that I hadn't done that. And he describes something that has a huge mouth with rotting flesh hanging off it and lots of randomly placed tentacles. And Arthur calls it a rock grubber. Scavengers. Slow moving, not particularly dangerous, but one of the ugliest things in the ocean. They'll eat anything, then store any toxins in their flesh, so not many creatures want to eat them. The rotting flesh is just that. All the tentacles are actually worms that burrow into their flesh. That sounds fucking horrifying. Absolutely not. No, thank you. This is when we get the conversation between Arthur and Sabe, and her saying, her reservations about Alestin. And she says, I think these storms have something to do with whatever price Candoran paid my grandmother. And Arthur says, I've been hearing rumors of high-level negotiations going on for a lot of the last year. And there have been windstorms coming down off Skyreach Range a bit lately. Kandaron and the Skyhold founders built great weather wards into the Skyreach range. They wanted to restrict future weather mages from getting as powerful as they did during the Ithonian Empire. There's a reason you get weather-related great powers more commonly than just about any other type. I'm guessing Kandaron bribed your grandmother and Indris by shutting the wards down. And that's interesting. I don't really know what to make of that. So, let's see. Those in the know have started calling those three the Coven, which we heard in the conversation that poor Hugh accidentally wound up singing part of. I've never seen great powers at this level cooperate so closely before, outside of alliances against Havath. I think it might be all about this exile splinter. And Sabe says, I don't think that's it. When I confronted Alestin, Ithos, and the concept of it returning clearly scared the shit out of him. And Archer's like, man, I don't think I've ever seen him scared. So if you saw that, that is really upsetting. And I don't like that. And he asks, have you talked to him about your suspicion, or have you talked to your friends about your suspicions? And she says, no, I don't think they'd want to know, to be honest. And it would just kind of fuck up the relationship that they've got with him. And they need to learn. And this would be a bad time for it. Archer says, I think he'll really do everything he can to take care of you. But his first priority is always going to be revenge. And Sabe's like, could you beat him if it came down to it? And he says, I don't know. Raw power, for sure. But he doesn't do straightforward kinds of fights. And I don't know that I would be able to keep up with the way that he plans for things and the creativity of his attacks and stuff. I mean, I really like him. I don't want to fight him. I would rather not think about it, if I'm being honest. And she says something about how, well, clearly you must not trust him because you wouldn't let him take us on this trip alone. And when Archer is like, well, I've got a lot of other things to worry about, she says, she thinks to herself, interesting that you didn't contradict what I said either, though, which is interesting. And I have no problem with him having his suspicions of Alestin. I actually kind of approve of the idea of the two adults each having their own way of looking at the situation. That makes me feel safer, if anything. So then we have Sabe having her nightmare about magma. And it gets interrupted by apparently Talia being there and helping her beat the magma, basically, and yelling, "You're safe, Sabe, I'm here." And of course my first thought is, oh shit, right, she's got Dreamfire, she can help. But then when Sabe wakes up, the Dreamfire thing just doesn't occur to her. She starts to wonder if she's been secretly developing a crush on Talia. That's what she leaps to, which is hilarious. And it isn't until Talia comes in and it's like, hey, I hope you don't mind that I was in your dream. She's like, oh, right, you can do that. And she mentions that she's been having dreams, nightmares. At this point, I think it would be weeks. And Talia is so disgusted and is just like, are you kidding me that you have just been sitting there suffering and I could have helped you? I fucking really? And Sabe says something about how she didn't want to wake Talia up, to which Talia is like, you dodo bird. I would be able to do these spells before we even went to sleep. It would be nothing. It'd be fine. And then Sabe is like, oh, maybe you could help Del, actually, because he's also having a lot of bad dreams. And Talia's like, yes, of course. I'll do whatever. It's fine. So last of these chapters, 23, Delta. And we have another moment of Hugh reading the conversation between Candoron and the Lich, I think. I don't remember the Lich's name. This is sort of an interesting thing because Hugh's spellbook, when Hugh tries to get the spellbook to sort of bring back what he read the last time, the book reacts with puzzlement. Like it doesn't understand what it is he's even asking, as if the book isn't aware of the words that were just on its pages. Which makes me wonder if it has something to do with his eyes transforming as well, that he is maybe seeing through Candoron's eyes a little bit. But I don't feel like that makes sense, because if that were true, then he would also see her like writing and the motion and everything. I don't know. But it's just puzzling to me that this is happening and the spellbook doesn't seem to have any connection, like isn't feeling it, you know? So let's see. I was not a member of the council when I ended the Empire. I have never and will never apologize for my actions in those years. And their response is, the Greater Radhand fleet is assembling in case they must rescue their brethren from the coming of the Cold Mines. I don't like that at all. The Cold Mines makes me feel like people who are like logical at the complete expense of empathy or compassion or creativity, or you know what I mean? Galvatren is no longer updating his bestiary, and we have lost track of his actions. Even the Wanderer is rumored to have returned. Not, of course, that we expect either you or Kiada to tell us if that were true. We're only lucky the Liar hasn't returned their attention back to Anastas. And I am not going to pretend that I can keep track of these names or what they do. And I don't think I'm supposed to at this point. So I'm just going to let it roll off. The message abruptly vanished, morphing into the lessons Candoron had sent him a couple days ago on the theory behind Starfire spellcraft. And he is again sort of like, I'm not supposed to know this. I don't know what to do. Talia comes in, and when she's like, what's going on? He says to her, I just think I found out something I'm not supposed to know. And I think I'm going to tell Sabe. And I love Talia's response. It's like, yeah, do that. I don't want to know. I'm good. But Sabe, no, we should definitely let her know. And they have a nice little moment about how, like, clearly, now that they're dating, things are going to be different between them. But it's not like they are going to suddenly become different people, which I do really appreciate. Because, you know, that is like, you can worry that that's going to happen. So we then go to Godric's POV, and the ship surfaces, and he is feeling a lot of relief. It's just like, I didn't think I was really claustrophobic, and I think I was mostly okay, but God, I started to really feel it being trapped underneath all that water. And Alestin says the Havathi seem to have finally realized where we're going, and they have several ships heading this direction at high speed. We should get to Zophor before they reach the Delta, but odds are they'll be close on our heels following us to the next site. Which, that sucks. Fucking Havathi. And when Sabe is like, well, if that isn't where we're supposed to go, how do we get out of the Delta? And he doesn't have an answer. And I'm like, that's not to say that he doesn't like know. He's just not telling her, which I think would annoy her more than anything, you know? So Archer mentions when they finally like get up to the dock, he's like, there's no guide here. And Godric's like, well, we literally just got here. And Archer's like, no, they're usually waiting. They are prepared. They're not late. This is not a good sign. It was only a handful of minutes later that the channel guide arrived, but even that short wait was a little alarming for the Radhan, it seemed. The guide, a Naga woman, was delivered to the deck of the ship by a pair of flyers, a wind mage and a gravity mage working in concert, though it was hard to tell. Apparently, the Cormorant's underwater approach had surprised the seers, simply appearing well within their range out of nowhere. I'm going to go ahead and believe that were true, because otherwise I would be suspicious that this wasn't their real guide and that the one they were supposed to have had been waylaid and replaced by somebody else. So I'm going to put my little fears to the side, suspicions, paranoias, if you want to call it that, and I'm going to believe it. But I'm just saying, but Godric took the time to chat with a few of the Radhan he'd befriended on the trip, including a couple of cute ones he'd danced with, though nothing more had developed there. Godric just felt awkward about trying to date on a ship with his father on board. Arthur would likely be relaxed and supportive about the whole thing, which for whatever reason made Godric feel even more awkward about the idea, which I completely understand. There is some talk about like the mangroves and how they secrete salt crystals to get rid of the excess salt in the water and process it, which I thought was neat. And I do really like a moment. Actually, I'm ahead of myself. First, we have Godric asking Alustin like if he spends time drawing spell forms and glyphs onto paper. And Alustin's like, oh yeah, I do that for like hours a day. Literally keeping so many things prepared. I'm a much better, more effective battle mage if I've got all of these tools prepared and ready to go. And let's see. Talia, not many problems explosions can't solve. I'm not saying they make the best solution or even a good one, but they're definitely a solution. So they're all doing their various trainings, and Godric is trying to... He is kind of feeling a little bit like of pressure over the fact that his father is so good at everything and that he doesn't catch on as quickly as he feels like he should. And he feels some resentment and then has to sort of get a hold of himself and be like, my dad doesn't expect me to even be at his own level. Like, that's not even a pressure that's on me, which I appreciate acknowledging. Even though that may be true, you can still feel that resentment sometimes pop up, and you get control of it and reason your way through it. But that's not to say that the emotion isn't sometimes there. So let's see. Hugh couldn't help but notice his spellbook trying to blend in with a group of bright green parrots. Monkeys raced through the trees, following the Rising Cormorant curiously. Hugh spotted a tree reach out and snatch a monkey off a branch at one point, before he realized it was a man-sized octopus that had camouflaged itself as a section of trunk. That is so scary, you guys. Like, come on. That's too much. Immense branches intertwined in midair, creating roads between various trees of the city. Most roads spiraled up and down the trunks of each mangrove, with shopfronts and homes carved into the trunks. Then Hugh blinked and realized the buildings of Zophor weren't carved, but were actually grown into the trees. There were even wagons pulled by what looked like boar-sized iguanas, which is very adorable sounding, I've got to say. Like, it sounds scary in a way, but iguanas just have a sort of friendly vibe to them, and I feel like a giant iguana I would be very okay with. And one of the faces moved, the great wooden eyes turning to fix on the Rising Cormorant, and Hugh froze. Several more faces shifted to look at the Cormorant with looks of idle interest. Most turned their eyes away soon enough, though a couple stayed focused on them. As the Cormorant sailed between the first trees of the city, Hugh realized they were even taller than he thought, and that the lowest level of the city was well over 50 feet above them, and they were at high tide now. One of the branches begins to move, and it like has like a hand at the end of the branch, and it scoops the ship up. Welcome to Zophor, domain of the Lich Zophor, home to 1/3 people and one of the greatest tree cities ever grown. Do try and behave. And that's the end of chapter 23. So I'm out of time, but I am going to say, I still don't know what liches are. So, just hoping that we get that explained to us. Because liches have just been mentioned and thrown around a lot. And when I think of what a lich is, the only thing I can think of is a lich yard, which is a graveyard. And that D&D illustration, I think of just a hooded cloak with glowing eyes and a skeletal hand. And that's all. And I'm that doesn't sound like somebody who'd have a tree city. I don't know. Maybe they would. Maybe I'm just being bigoted. I don't know. But anyway, okay. I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Thank you, Dan, for commissioning this. Really having fun reading this. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.